The first cold wind of the season in 1991 blew through the Colorado mountains as Rebecca Moore left the small forest-side coffee shop where she had just finished her late shift. The golden light cast on her tired face, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. The next morning, Rebecca's car was found on a snow-covered road, locked tight, radio still on, but no trace of her. The entire town of Estes Park was plunged into fear, then clung to hope when an enthusiastic neighbor stepped up to help with the search. Dubbed the community hero, no one suspected that from those seemingly kind hands, the town's most horrific secret would gradually be unearthed. A secret that would make America shudder 30 years later. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chilling cases. On the night of October 11, 1991, Estes Park, the small town nestled in the Rocky Mountains, was immersed in the first chill of winter. Wind howled through the wooden rooftops, and scattered snowflakes fell on the dimly lit main street under yellow lamps. Inside the Trailhead Diner coffee shop, Rebecca Lynn Moore, 24 years old, was clearing tables after her evening shift. She was a diligent employee, always staying until the end. Her coworkers remembered that Rebecca was cheerful that night, saying she would head home early before the snow got heavier. Around 10:45 p.m., she untied her apron, put on her gray sweater, pulled on her blue knit hat, said goodbye to everyone, and stepped outside. The wind chimes tinkled as the door closed behind her. That was the last time anyone saw her. Rebecca lived alone in a small wooden house a few miles from the diner, getting around in her red Chevrolet Cavalier. Her parents, Harold and Linda Moore, lived in a neighborhood near the town center. They usually called their daughter in the evenings, and Linda always left the porch light on so she could spot the house easily when coming home late. But that night, the phone rang endlessly with no answer. The yellow porch light stayed on until late. Around midnight, Harold drove out of the house, heading along the highway toward the diner. The landscape was blanketed in white, not a soul in sight. He pulled up to the parking lot, seeing only thick snow cover, no trace of the familiar red car. Meanwhile, back home, Linda kept calling Rebecca's friends and coworkers. No one knew where she was. The whole town was shrouded in silence, save for the wind swirling through the valley. The next morning, the sun peeked weakly over the mountain peaks, with light snow still falling. Linda had coffee brewing and breakfast set out on the table as usual, but Rebecca's chair sat empty. No note, no sign of a voluntary departure. She tried to reassure herself, thinking her daughter might have crashed at a friend's place, but a gut feeling hit her like a piercing cold. Something had happened. Harold called the diner, and the manager said Rebecca had left right on time the night before. Nothing unusual seen, and no sign of her car. The couple drove all over town, in along the lakeside roads, over the hills, even the forest trails, calling their daughter's name through the heavy snow. No response. They asked every neighbor, every shop. Everyone shook their heads. It was as if Rebecca had vanished from the place she'd lived her whole life. That afternoon, Harold returned home, hands numb with cold, heart weighed down. He stood still for a moment, then picked up the landline. His voice trembled as he told the police dispatcher, "My daughter is missing. She would never do this." The officer asked for details: clothing, car, time she left the diner. He jotted it down, promising to alert the patrol unit. Harold hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Outside the window, the wind still howled through the pine groves, carrying the last snowflakes of the long night. On the porch, the light still burned, casting a dim glow on the empty road. In that small house, fear began to spread like cold fog. The fear they would carry for 3 decades in their search for the daughter who disappeared into the night of Estes Park. The next morning, once the missing person report was filed, the Estes Park police immediately launched a search. Being a small town, news spread fast. The young waitress missing after her shift, no one seeing or hearing anything, her car unaccounted for. Snow blanketed the paths, erasing all traces. Lieutenant James Keller, the officer in charge of the area, mobilized the entire patrol force along with local volunteers. One team used tracking dogs to comb around Rebecca's home. Another checked the road leading back to the Trailhead Diner. Every snowdrift was probed. Every patch of dry grass along the forest edge turned over, but no signs of her or the red Chevrolet Cavalier turned up. The Moore family hardly left the scene. Linda stood by the police car, clutching her daughter's jacket tightly, while Harold trailed every search team. Local residents, shop owners, carpenters, students, all came to help. Among them, One middle-aged man stood out for his eagerness. Gary Holbrook, owner of a garage near the market. He was the first to volunteer his snowmobile to assist in searching the hilly areas. "We'll find her," Gary said curtly, then climbed on and sped off into the cold wind. The first 3 days passed without results. The scent dogs only paused at the southern forest edge, where shifting winds mixed the smell into the air. Police expanded the search into Roosevelt National Forest, a vast woodland with steep terrain and narrow trails. The snow grew thicker, making movement difficult. Flyers with Rebecca's photo were posted on every utility pole, post office, and store. The image of the young woman with brown hair and a faint smile seemed to weigh even heavier on the town. Everyone started fearing they were searching for someone who might no longer be alive. On the afternoon of the 4th day, a volunteer group spotted a small clue, a shard of red plastic by the roadside near the slope leading to Estes Lake. Police collected it, suspecting it might be from Rebecca's car, but there wasn't enough to confirm. As night fell, fierce winds lashed the forest, and blinding snow forced them to halt. Harold refused to leave, standing silently under the police car's headlights, eyes fixed on the deep darkness. Linda sat in the car, gripping her husband's cold hand, murmuring prayers. The next day, police called for more volunteers. Teams split up along the route Rebecca usually drove home from the diner along Main Street, over the wooden bridge, then turning toward Pine Ridge Hill. They scoured every curve, every incline. A few locals recalled seeing headlights pass that night, but couldn't pinpoint the direction. A convenience store clerk mentioned hearing a loud engine rev around 11 p.m., thinking it was a local vehicle going by. Every detail was too vague. By the end of the week, the search scaled up. Larimer County helicopters flew scans over the western forest. From above, police saw only endless white. No skid marks, no tire tracks, nothing indicating Rebecca had left town by the main roads. At nightfall, the search teams returned exhausted, coats caked in snow. Gary Holbrook was always the last to leave the scene, insisting he'd be back early the next day. The whole town gradually fell quiet. In the following days, only small teams kept going. Police started logging every odd call, rumors of a red car spotted far away, but nothing panned out. For the Moore family, each morning dragged on like a year. Harold couldn't sleep, and Linda still turned on the porch light every night, hoping that glow might guide her daughter home. In the evening news, the anchor recapped the disappearance, urging residents to come forward with tips. But amid the cold mountain winds, only silence replied. Rebecca Moore, the young woman of Estes Park, had vanished, and no one understood why. On the morning of the 5th day after Rebecca disappeared, the weather improved slightly, with weak sunlight illuminating the ice-covered mountain slopes. The search team returned to the southern town area, where the red plastic shard suspected to be from her car had been found. Near noon, a volunteer group consisting of 2 locals and 1 police officer spotted something glinting among the pines, a dark red object nearly buried under a thin layer of snow. As they approached, they realized it was Rebecca Lynn Moore's red Chevrolet Cavalier. The car was tilted off a narrow forest road, leading into Roosevelt National Forest, about 4 miles from town. The doors were locked, snow blanketing the hood and windshield, as if it had sat there for days. Police swiftly cordoned off the scene, setting up yellow tape around the area. Harold and Linda were notified, and arrived immediately, but weren't allowed near. They stood at a distance, staring at their daughter's familiar car, the one that had taken her to work every day, now silent in the woods, like a cold witness. Linda burst into sobs, while Harold just clenched his fists, eyes locked on the officers prying open the car door. Inside, Rebecca's wallet, papers, and a few personal items remained intact. A lipstick tube, a cassette box, some loose change under the seat. No signs of struggle or disturbance. Her purse sat neatly on the back seat, with an old landline phone and spare keys in the trunk. Police noted an odd detail: the radio was set to cassette mode, and the tape inside was labeled in handwriting, "For Becky, unknown origin." Outside the car, snow was lightly churned around the front tires, mixed with faint boot prints larger than a woman's foot. However, with time passed and heavy snowfall, most traces were covered. Crime scene technicians photographed, sampled soil, tire marks, and collected every possible piece of evidence. One officer noted the car was locked from the outside, unusual if the owner had left in a hurry. The forensics team towed the vehicle to Larimer County headquarters for a thorough exam. Meanwhile, police swept the surrounding forest for more clues. No other dropped items were found, nor signs that Rebecca had ever left the car, and ventured deeper into the woods. That afternoon, local news aired a brief report. The car of missing woman Rebecca Moore has been found, but no sign of the owner. The town fell silent. Many began speculating, maybe she'd been stopped by someone, or someone had driven her car there to throw off the trail. At the scene, police also realized the car's position was on a rarely used road, near an old fishing spot popular years ago. This route was known only to locals familiar with the area, leading them to suspect the perpetrator might be someone from around there. Gary Holbrook, the most active search volunteer, was present too. He helped move gear and assist police in clearing the area. Gary said he often hunted deer in these woods during fall, and knew the turnoff well. When asked, he seemed shocked, saying he never expected to find the car here. Police took his statement, but raised no suspicions for now. That night, the Moore family returned home, the living room still lit. They didn't speak to each other, just stared at their daughter's photo on the table. The car had been found, but Rebecca's whereabouts remained unknown. To them, the Cavalier sitting quietly in the woods wasn't hope, it was a chilling omen. And for the Estes Park police, the disappearance now officially shifted from a woman gone missing to the first serious criminal investigation the peaceful town had faced in nearly a decade. Immediately after the Chevrolet Cavalier was towed to the Larimer County headquarters, the official investigation began. Estes Park Police coordinated with the sheriff's office to conduct a thorough examination of every detail of the vehicle. No bloodstains, no signs of struggle or forced entry. However, the fact that the car was locked from the outside made them suspect this was not an accident. In the trunk, they found a small scrap of paper with some scribbled numbers, possibly a phone number, and a cassette tape with the words, "For Becky," that drew special attention. The tape was sent to the audio analysis lab, but it only contained an old song and some indistinct noises of unclear origin. There was no information to identify who left it. Police began screening Rebecca's acquaintances. Friends and co-workers were brought in for statements. They all described her as quiet, disciplined, and rarely going out at night. A few mentioned her ex-boyfriend, Tommy Rogers, a lifeguard at Estes Lake. They had broken up nearly a year earlier, but a few said Tommy still showed up at the coffee shop occasionally, seeming like he wanted to reconcile. Police brought him in for questioning. Tommy stated that on the night of October 11th, he was on night duty at the rescue station with witnesses. He insisted he hadn't seen Rebecca in months. Duty logs and co-worker confirmations proved he was elsewhere, clearing him from suspicion for the time being. Investigators continued checking traffic cameras along the route from the coffee shop to Roosevelt Forest, but in 1991, the surveillance system was very limited. A few stores had old cameras with blurry footage that got overwritten. No footage captured the Cavalier that night. They also interviewed residents near where the car was found, but no one heard noises or saw strange lights at the time. The snowstorm that night had nearly erased all traces. Meanwhile, another investigation team analyzed the forest scene. Footprints were photographed and compared for size, larger than Rebecca's, possibly belonging to a man. However, soil samples and footprints were distorted by melting snow, making it impossible to extract clear sole patterns. They also collected a few hairs from the car, but DNA technology at the time was too rudimentary for accurate matching. The preliminary forensics report concluded, no evidence that the victim was assaulted in the vehicle, but the possibility of criminal activity outside cannot be ruled out. Under public pressure, police held a brief press conference, confirming the discovery of the car and stating that all possibilities are being considered. The Moore family sat in the front row, silent amid dozens of camera lenses. Mrs. Linda could only bow her head when reporters asked about hopes of finding her daughter. After the press conference, Estes Park residents began sharing news, even embellishing stories. Some said they saw a black pickup truck near the coffee shop. Others claimed Rebecca had mentioned fearing she was being followed. Police verified each tip, but nothing panned out. Over the next 2 weeks, dozens of reports were filed and then shelved. A few witnesses claimed to see red taillights on the mountain road that night, but all were vague on timing. An elderly couple living near Estes Lake said they heard an engine revving around midnight, but they thought it was just a late hunter. Police found nothing new, the case began to stall, and media attention gradually cooled. By late October, the investigation team narrowed down, with only 2 officers continuing to follow up. They kept screening Rebecca's old acquaintances, including some regular customers at the diner. On this list, the name Gary Holbrook was noted briefly. Mechanic, actively participated in search, knew the victim. At the time, Gary was seen as a good Samaritan, willing to assist police, so no one questioned him. But at the end of an internal report, Lieutenant Keller still added a line, "Something doesn't feel quite right." That note was forgotten amid dozens of documents, and would only be mentioned again 30 years later when the truth finally came to light. As the investigation began to cool off, with only a few officers continuing to track old leads, the name Gary Holbrook still appeared regularly in the files. He owned a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Estes Park, less than 2 miles from the Trailhead Diner. Gary was around 40, widowed, living alone in a mobile home next to the shop. To neighbors, he was enthusiastic, somewhat solitary but always ready to help. When Rebecca's disappearance happened, Gary was one of the first to sign up for the search. He often carried a walkie-talkie and snowmobile, assisting police in hard-to-reach terrain areas. On heavy snow days, people were familiar with the sight of Gary in a thick coat, flashlight in hand, joining volunteer groups. He spoke little, did much, and seemed to always know where to go. To the Moore family, Gary was a valuable friend. He helped post flyers, brought food for the search team, even installed extra lights on their porch so Rebecca can see the way home. That small gesture brought tears to Mrs. Linda's eyes. Many in town saw Gary as a symbol of community spirit, the good man who stepped up when others were in need. Local TV even interviewed him in a short news segment, footage of Gary standing by the snow-covered forest, speaking in a gravelly voice, "I didn't know the girl well, but no one deserves to vanish like that." The simple words moved many. A week after the car was found, Gary reported to police that he had discovered something that might belong to Rebecca. While combing the western area of Roosevelt Forest, he found a green wool scarf half buried in the snow, about a mile from where the car was located. Police arrived to collect it, confirming it was the type Rebecca often wore. No bloodstains or tears, but the evidence was sent straight to storage. A photo was taken of Gary handing over the scarf. He bowed his head, holding the nylon bag face stern. From that day he was praised even more. A local paper ran a story headlined, "The Neighbor Who Doesn't Give Up." At the time, police had no reason to suspect Gary. No criminal record, clean background, actively involved in support activities. Still, Lieutenant Keller, the lead investigator, felt something odd. He noticed Gary often showed up at scenes before search groups were even dispatched. Many times, he knew exactly which areas to check, as if someone was guiding him. Keller noted it in his work log but had no evidence to raise questions. The case lacked information, lacked traces, and everything gradually ground to a halt. Winter passed, snow melting gradually on the mountainsides, and search teams were disbanded. Gary still dropped by the Moore house occasionally, bringing baked goods or helping Mr. Harold fix the porch roof. He always asked, "Any new leads?" then shook his head sadly at the answer. Mrs. Linda once told a reporter that Gary was the only one who never stops hoping. In a small place like Estes Park, memories of Rebecca lingered, but Gary's devoted presence eased the fear a bit. No one suspected that the wool scarf he found that day, the only piece of evidence left in the snowy forest, would become the first link straight to the truth 30 years later. When spring 1992 arrived, the Rebecca Moore disappearance file was temporarily closed. Police noted briefly, "No new leads, victim not located." Gary returned to his daily work at the repair shop, occasionally still sending Christmas cards to the Moore family. To everyone, he remained the kind volunteer neighbor, the man who tried his best to help. Only Lieutenant Keller, when signing the final report, still harbored a vague feeling that he was missing something. But the case had gone cold, and Gary Holbrook faded from police view, at least for the next 3 decades. That winter passed without bringing any leads. As snow melted on the mountainsides and Estes Lake began to thaw, searches stopped in waves and then vanished entirely. The Moore family kept in touch with police, but each call got the same response: nothing new. They printed more flyers, posting them at gas stations, restaurants, campgrounds, hoping someone who passed through the forest road that day would remember something. But as time dragged on, people's memories faded, and the town's interest settled down. The Trailhead Diner reopened. Customers sat in the same spots, only the table where Rebecca worked left empty. Mrs. Linda turned away each time she passed it, while Mr. Harold tried to stay calm but every morning drove up to the forest, searching the slopes Rebecca had walked. He told no one, just carried an old flashlight and a photo of his daughter. By April 1992, Larimer County Police held an internal meeting to assess progress. The report concluded that the likelihood of Rebecca having an accident was highest. A few officers thought she might have gotten lost and fallen into a ravine, body buried under snow, but no concrete evidence, and the search budget was exhausted. Lieutenant Keller, the only one still holding hope, proposed extending searches a few more weeks. The proposal was denied. The case was officially suspended. From that day, Rebecca Lynn Moore's name only remained in the missing presumed dead file section. The Moore family couldn't accept that. Mrs. Linda refused to use the word dead, saying as long as she wasn't found, Rebecca was still out there somewhere. They joined missing person support groups, sent info to national search organizations, even enlisted a local psychic for help. Many came and went, bringing hope then leaving disappointment. A woman claimed to see a girl like Rebecca in Wyoming. A truck driver said he'd picked up a hitchhiker with similar features. Police verified all, none was her. Each new rumor only deepened the old pain. Meanwhile, life in Estes Park gradually returned to normal. Residents busied themselves with tourist season, visitors pouring in to sightsee. The poster with Rebecca's face faded, edges frayed by wind, finally taken down from the post office bulletin board. The story of the missing girl was only recalled on winter evenings when someone mentioned that weird case from '91. Gary Holbrook still stopped by the Moore house occasionally, checking in, bringing a bit of baked goods or a newspaper clipping. He said, "If there's anything I can do, just call." Mrs. Linda smiled, thanks, though in her heart, she began to find it odd. He seemed never to forget this, and never to leave for good. Time passed, one snow season after another. By late 1993, the case was officially closed. No more search teams, no more news, just the small house where the porch light stayed on every night. Mr. Harold spoke less, his hair graying faster, while Mrs. Linda kept the habit of setting an extra breakfast plate on the table. In her journal she wrote, "Darling, if you're out there somewhere, give Mom a sign. There's still someone here waiting for you." But year after year, no signal came. The hope the Moore family tried to hold on to began to fade, slowly but surely, like the flickering porch light, still glowing in the mountain wind, but about to go out in people's hearts. In 1994, when all search efforts had reached a dead end, the disappearance of Rebecca Lynn Moore was officially transferred to the cold case section of the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. The file, over 200 pages thick, including crime scene photos, witness statements, and a list of sealed evidence stored in the archives. A blue wool scarf, a cassette tape labeled "For Becky," a few strands of hair, cigarette butts, and a piece of red plastic found near the forest road. The entire evidence was placed into a metal box, labeled Moore, Rebecca L., 1991, then shelved among hundreds of unsolved cases. Lieutenant Keller, who had once led the investigation, submitted the final summary: cause of disappearance undetermined. Suspected criminal involvement. Afterward, he was reassigned to another department, and the case gradually faded into oblivion. The Moore family never gave up. They sent letters to the police every year, asking if there were any new developments, but most went unanswered. By the late 1990s, when DNA technology began to be discussed in criminal investigations, Mrs. Linda wrote a long letter to the Estes Park Police Department, requesting retesting of the evidence. However, the lab facilities at the time were limited, and processing old samples required significant funding, so the request was shelved. Insufficient viable samples, that brief note was added to the file in 1998. The following decade, life continued to move on. Mr. Harold passed away in 2005 from heart disease, carrying with him the unresolved anguish of not knowing where his daughter was. Mrs. Linda moved in with her sister in Boulder, still keeping Rebecca's photos on the table. Every year, on October 11th, she lit a small candle and wrote in her journal, "She still hasn't been found." No one in the family still believed in miracles, but they still wanted to believe that one day, someone would reopen that long-dormant file box. In the police archives, dust accumulated thickly on each file box. New officers didn't know the name Rebecca Moore, until a records clerk happened to reread an old report in 2010. She noted, "No DNA results, evidence still intact." That line was highlighted in red in the electronic log, inadvertently keeping the case from being purged from the system. That same year, a local TV program revisited the story Mysterious Disappearances in Colorado, which mentioned Rebecca. Images of the snow-covered forest, the red car, and the wool scarf were rebroadcast on television, prompting some older residents in Estes Park to recall the old tale. But no one had any new information. The Moore Rebecca L. file continued to lie dormant in the darkness of the cold storage, among hundreds of other cases. 30 years passed, and those who had once been involved in the investigation had all retired or died. Only a few faded lines of text, a few blurry photos, and the sealed evidence remained to prove that a young woman had once vanished into the first snowfall of 1991. And it was from that silence that a new opportunity would unexpectedly emerge, the beginning of a belated case-breaking journey that no one thought possible. In March 2021, 30 years after Rebecca Moore disappeared, a group of 2 young hikers from Denver went on a short camping trip in Roosevelt National Forest. While following a little-used trail near the northwest area of Estes Park, they spotted something protruding amid the moss and rocks. At first, they thought it was an animal bone, but upon closer inspection, the shape was too round and uniform, like a human bone. They immediately called the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. The forensics team and investigators arrived quickly, sealing off a 500-meter radius around the discovery site. In the damp soil, technicians successively uncovered a few small bone fragments, a rusted shirt button, and notably, a metal keychain engraved with Trailhead Diner, Estes Park, Colorado. The inscription was faint but clear enough to evoke a name forgotten for 3 decades, Rebecca Lynn Moore. The bone samples were sent to the forensics lab in Fort Collins. Preliminary results indicated female human remains, estimated age 20 to 30, time of death over 20 years prior. Police immediately cross-referenced with long-term missing persons files in the area, and the name Rebecca Moore quickly stood out. Age, timeline, location, all matched. DNA extracted from the bones was sent to the Colorado State Bureau of Investigation's lab for comparison with the 1991 biological sample in the file. A week later, the results came back, perfect match. What was found in that forest was the remains of the young woman who had vanished into the first seasonal snowfall 30 years earlier. News spread quickly. The Estes Park Police Department held an emergency press conference, announcing that remains discovered in Roosevelt National Forest have been identified as those of the 1991 missing victim, Rebecca Lynn Moore. The press room was filled with flashing lights as reporters jostled to take notes. For many locals, the name evoked a hazy memory, the first and most mysterious disappearance the town had ever known. Now, though there was an answer to "Where is Rebecca?", a bigger question loomed: what happened to her? A new investigative team was formed immediately after, consisting of young officers combined with 2 former investigators from the original case. Among them was Detective Claire Jensen, who had been an intern on Lieutenant Keller's team back then. 30 years later, she returned to the case like an unfulfilled promise. Claire still remembered every detail: the red car, the blue wool scarf, and the mechanic who was always present at every search. She proposed reopening all the old evidence for examination with modern technology. The 1991 sealed metal boxes were retrieved from storage, the thick dust wiped clean. Everything was transported to the state's DNA analysis lab for retesting under the latest standards. During the examination of the new scene, the forensics team also discovered a few decayed fabric scraps scattered around the bone area. One of them had a pattern matching the jacket Rebecca had worn the night she disappeared. Beneath the soil, they found a few small nylon strands, like binding cords. All were carefully collected for analysis. Preliminary results showed these nylon strands were not the common type but limited production industrial binding cord. A small detail, but enough to catch the investigators' attention. As the press coverage intensified, the old photo of Rebecca with her gentle smile appeared across Colorado media. Mrs. Linda Moore, now nearly 80, was personally notified by police. She went silent, gripping the young investigator's hand tightly, managing only 2 words: "Thank you." She no longer cried, just quietly gazed at her daughter's photo on the table. Finally, she had been found. For the Larimer County Sheriff's Office, identifying the victim's body after 30 years was not just a technical achievement, but an opportunity to reopen one of the state's longest cold cases. And while most of the town thought the story was over, for Detective Claire Jensen, this was only the beginning. Right after the remains' identity was confirmed, the Larimer County Sheriff's Office formed a special investigative task force to re-examine the entire Rebecca Moore case. This was one of the oldest files in the county, and the media attention left no room for delay. The team consisted of 8 members, led by Lieutenant Marcus Reed, including Detective Claire Jensen, who had been an intern on Lieutenant Keller's team 30 years prior. Claire, now a veteran investigator, was invited back because she knew the old file best. For her, this was not just professional duty, but a debt to the past, the first case she had ever joined, but never seen resolved. The first meeting took place in a small conference room at the Fort Collins headquarters. On the wall, dozens of old photos were pinned up: the red car, the blue wool scarf, the forest map, and a portrait of Rebecca when she was alive. Claire stared at that photo for a long time, then said, "If someone killed her, they thought time would bury it all. Now it's time to prove them wrong." That short statement became the team's guiding spirit. The first task was to review all the 1991 sealed evidence. The old metal boxes were brought out of storage, newly tagged, and sent to a modern DNA analysis lab in Denver. Inside were items that once seemed worthless: the wool scarf, the cassette tape, a few strands of hair, the red plastic piece, and 2 remaining cigarette butts. Today's DNA technology allowed extraction from even tiny samples, and the team hoped this would be the key to unlocking the case. Claire requested cross-matching the new victim samples with national databases, while also conducting genealogy testing, DNA ancestry techniques that could trace suspects' relatives through public databases. In parallel with the forensics work, another group handled reviewing the old statements. They called back every surviving witness, from Trailhead Diner co-workers to those who had joined the searches. Most had moved away, or were elderly, but everyone clearly remembered one person: Gary Holbrook, the kind-hearted neighbor who had led the initial search parties. "He helped a lot," one witness said, "always showing up earlier than everyone else, like he knew where to look." The investigative team noted this name in their review list. In the office, Claire opened the yellowed old file. The last page was Lieutenant Keller's 1992 summary report, with the note, "Something doesn't quite add up." She read that line over and over, her heart heavy. Claire recalled Keller's gaze when he spoke of Gary Holbrook, the man he felt was too enthusiastic. But at the time, there was no evidence, and all suspicions fell silent. Now 30 years later, that name resurfaced. When the first preliminary test results came back, one detail caught the whole team's attention. DNA from the wool scarf had 2 sources, one from the victim, and one from an unidentified male. The data was entered into CODIS, but it didn't match any criminal profiles in the national database. This meant the suspect may never have been arrested or recorded before. To expand the scope, the lab suggested applying DNA genealogy testing, the technology that had cracked many cold cases in recent decades. While awaiting results, the investigative team held a press conference, calling on the public for tips. They released a reconstructed image of Rebecca's face, with a message: "If you lived in Estes Park in 1991 and know anything about the night she disappeared, contact us." A tip line was opened around the clock. Among hundreds of calls, most were sympathetic shares, but a few bits of information caught Claire's eye. Small anecdotes about a man who was always present at every search. A man who once said, "If she's dead, at least I tried my best." That statement, 30 years ago, had once moved the whole town. Now in the investigators' eyes, it became the first question mark on the path to the truth. The DNA genealogy analysis results from the Denver lab were sent back just 3 weeks after the special investigation team reopened the case. The report, nearly 200 pages long, featured the most notable section: a genetic family tree constructed from hundreds of public profiles. The unknown male DNA sample on Rebecca's wool scarf matched a small branch of the Holbrook lineage, a rare surname, with most members living primarily around the Estes Park and Boulder areas. Cross-referencing resident records, the investigation team found only one person with that surname who had lived in Estes Park in 1991: Gary Holbrook, owner of a machine shop who had once been a search volunteer. This discovery stunned the entire team. Claire Jensen sat staring at the name on the screen, feeling as if the circle of time had closed right back at the starting point she and Lieutenant Keller had suspected 30 years earlier. However, it was only genealogical similarity so far, not yet evidence for conviction. Lieutenant Marcus Reed demanded a direct DNA sample from Gary for confirmation. The team began investigating his current background. Records showed Gary Holbrook still lived in Estes Park, still ran his small old auto repair shop, and had never left the state of Colorado. He was now over 70. with no prior criminal record or arrests. Neighbors described him as a gentle, quiet man who often helped people, just like 30 years ago. Claire found that irony only heightened the suspicion. A real killer couldn't live so calmly in the place where he had buried his crime for all those years without believing he was safe. The investigation team planned to secretly obtain Gary's DNA sample without alerting him or the community. 2 officers disguised themselves as customers and went to the machine shop requesting a car repair. They observed that Gary was still robust, hands covered in machine oil, speaking politely. When he poured coffee for the customers, one of the officers discreetly kept the paper cup. This cup, along with cigarette butts from the trash bin, was taken back to the lab for analysis. Within a week, the results came back. Gary Holbrook's DNA sample matched the male sample recovered from Rebecca Moore's wool scarf perfectly, the margin of error nearly zero. This report was sent directly to the Larimer County Prosecutor's Office. Claire printed out the results, placing them next to the faded photo of the wool scarf. She knew this moment was the turning point the entire town had waited for over 30 years. However, Reed demanded absolute secrecy until they had sufficient additional evidence. He worried that an early arrest could cause the case to collapse if deemed insufficiently grounded. In the meantime, the investigation team quietly gathered more data: Gary's shop's material purchase history, tax records, lists of past employees. One detail caught their attention. In 1991, Gary had purchased a large quantity of industrial nylon rope used for securing heavy loads, the exact type of rope forensics had found near Rebecca's skeletal remains. Although the original receipts were no longer archived, the old accounting records still clearly documented the transaction. The pieces were starting to fit together. When Claire pinned the case map to the wall, connecting the points from the coffee shop, Rebecca's usual route, the location where her car was found, to the site where the body was discovered, the line passed right through the area, near Gary Holbrook's machine shop. All the traces led in the same direction. She looked at her colleagues, her voice firm. This is no longer coincidence. He's been right here, right in this town. And when Reed nodded, the entire meeting room fell silent. Everyone understood that the next step would be the decisive one. The final confrontation with the man they had once believed was the good neighbor for 30 years. Once the DNA results were confirmed, the special investigation team decided to launch a statewide media campaign to seek additional information. Lieutenant Marcus Reed and Detective Claire Jensen knew they needed to awaken the memories of those who had lived in Estes Park in 1991. On May 22, 2021, the Larimer County Police held a press conference announcing the reopening of the investigation into the disappearance and murder of Rebecca Lynn Moore, while establishing a 24/7 tip-line hotline. Images of Rebecca with her brown hair and gentle smile appeared across TV news broadcasts. Under the caption, "If you were in Estes Park in 1991, call if you remember anything." The campaign quickly drew statewide attention. In just 2 days, the tip line received hundreds of calls. Many were just expressions of sympathy, but amid those shares, a few valuable details began to emerge. A woman in Loveland recalled going to Gary Holbrook's auto repair shop with her father, and he talked too much, always mentioning the missing girl case. A man who had once worked for Gary said he often brought home rolls of industrial nylon rope for no clear reason. Both statements were recorded and timeline arranged. In particular, a call from an elderly resident in Estes Park caught Claire's attention. He said that in late October 1991, he had seen a man park near the West Trail in Roosevelt Forest, the spot where Rebecca's remains were later found. He was covered in machine oil, said he was a mechanic named Gary. "I remember because my car had broken down that day," he recounted. When asked why he was reporting it now, he simply replied, "Back then, everyone thought he was a good guy. I didn't want to stir things up." The statement left the entire meeting room silent. The media began heavily exploiting the image of the former search hero, who might be the killer. Headlines like "Helper" or "Culprit" blanketed Colorado newspapers. Many locals who knew Gary said they were shocked and couldn't believe it. Images of the dusty, shuttered old machine shop appeared on evening news with the question, "What has he hidden for 30 years?" Public attention poured into Estes Park, turning the old case into a national focal point. Gary Holbrook, now 72, suddenly became the eye of the storm. He avoided reporters, rarely left home, and the shop ceased operations. When a reporter knocked on his door, he only said, "I didn't kill anyone. I helped them find that girl, and that's all." That denial did not ease the suspicions. Instead, it led to even tighter surveillance on him. Within the investigation team, Reed and Claire knew they were at a sensitive juncture. Public pressure helped them obtain a search warrant, but every move had to be absolutely discreet. Investigators combed through all tip-line calls, cross-referencing with maps and old records. The scattered memories of residents began to align. A gray pickup truck appearing on the Forest Road in 1991, a loud engine noise at midnight, a man in an oil-stained jacket present at every search. When the comprehensive report was complete, Claire placed the thick file on the command table. "We have the DNA, witnesses, and a clear picture of that night," she said. Marcus Reed looked up at Rebecca's photo on the wall, his eyes heavy. "And now all eyes are on us." Outside, Estes Park lit up again, but this time not with the peaceful glow of a tourist town, but with a light shining straight into the secret buried for 30 years that was about to be exposed. On June 2, 2021, the Denver lab sent back the final results, an affirmation that the trash DNA recovered from Gary Holbrook's coffee cup and cigarette butts matched the male DNA on Rebecca Moore's wool scarf absolutely. The probability of error was only 1 in 1 billion. The report was printed, sealed, and sent directly to the Larimer County Prosecutor's Office. In the meeting room, no one spoke for a few minutes. Claire Jensen sat still, eyes fixed on the words, "Match confirmed." 30 years, thousands of search hours, and hundreds of false leads. Finally, it all pointed to one man. "This is him," Lieutenant Marcus Reed said, his voice hoarse. No one disagreed. By protocol, the police still needed to verify the legality of the trash sample obtained. The legal department thoroughly reviewed the collection process. The paper cup and cigarette butts were taken openly from the shop's trash bin, requiring no search warrant, entirely legal. To bolster the file, the investigation team sent 2 other officers back to the machine shop, pretending to request a car repair, and collected additional new trash samples, an empty soda can, and a tissue. The repeated analysis confirmed a perfect match. There was no longer any doubt about the identity of the man once called the good neighbor. Claire printed 2 copies of the DNA results, placing them side by side with the photo of smiling Rebecca. "She's been waiting for us to say this," she said softly. To her, justice wasn't just arresting a suspect, but giving voice back to the one forgotten for 3 decades. The investigation team immediately prepared the file for an arrest warrant. However, Marcus Reed remained cautious. "We only have DNA and a few indirect statements. I want physical evidence." He ordered a sweep of the entire area around the Holbrook shop. On June 5, the forensics team conducted a search. They discovered a small plot behind the shop, where the soil showed signs of being dug up multiple times. Under nearly 30 inches of earth, they found scraps of industrial nylon, along with old brass fittings. Quick analysis showed this rope type matched exactly the sample collected at the scene where Rebecca's body was found. Everything was sealed and documented. With the supplemental physical evidence, the Larimer County prosecutor immediately signed an emergency arrest warrant for Gary Holbrook. Meanwhile, Gary continued living calmly, as if nothing had happened. He appeared at the grocery store, greeting neighbors, though wariness had entered everyone's eyes. The police didn't rush into action, they quietly monitored his every move. On June 10, at 6 a.m., the tactical team secretly surrounded the mobile home next to the shop. Gary stepped out with a coffee mug, startled to see police cars blocking the way. "What's this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Claire stepped forward, presenting the warrant. "Gary Holbrook, you are under arrest for the murder of Rebecca Lynn Moore in October 1991. He stood silent for a few seconds, then softly replied, 30 years, I knew this day would come." As he was handcuffed and led to the car, Gary didn't resist. In the distance, the early morning sun cast golden light on the old shop, once a symbol of kindness. Now that very place had become the scene of a crime buried deep. In the car, Claire looked through the rearview mirror, seeing him sit motionless, eyes vacant. In her mind, only one thought echoed, justice may come late, but it never forgets the way back. On the morning of June 10, 2021, Estes Park woke up in the quiet atmosphere of early summer, but the small neighborhood where Holbrook's machine shop was located was full of police cars. 6 unmarked black SUVs were parked along the dirt road, signal lights off, engines idling softly. The Larimer County Task Force was ready. At 6:15 a.m., Lieutenant Marcus Reed gave the signal. 2 officers approached the front door. Another group circled to the back. Gary Holbrook's mobile home stood isolated, windows still lit. He was awake. As he stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand and squinting in the sunlight, the shout rang out. "Larimer County Police. Mr. Holbrook, stay in place." For a moment Gary froze, his eyes stunned then shifting to an eerie calm. He set the mug down, raised both hands. No one needed to use force. Claire Jensen stepped forward, reading the arrest warrant in a firm voice. Gary Holbrook, you are under arrest for the murder of Rebecca Lynn Moore in October 1991. Gary looked at her, his pale eyes faintly smiling. 30 years and it's finally here. The word sent a shiver through the entire team. As he was handcuffed, he didn't resist, only adding, I thought you'd forgotten. Claire replied softly, no one forgets. He bowed his head, silent. The police led him through the rusted fence, where grass grew knee-high, the coffee mug still steaming on the porch steps, an image that the press later called the symbol of shattered tranquility. News of the arrest spread within hours. By noon, major TV stations had set up vans outside the police headquarters. Reporters crowded, cameras pointed straight at the suspect transport vehicle as it pulled up to the back gate. Inside, Gary sat still, eyes distant. An officer later recounted that he didn't ask about the reason for the arrest, didn't request a lawyer, just remained silent the whole way from the shop to Fort Collins. When led into the holding cell, he whispered to a young investigator, did they find her? Upon hearing the answer, yes. In Roosevelt Forest, he just nodded and said no more. In the interrogation room, Claire and Reed personally handled the first questioning session. Gary Holbrook, 72 years old, sat upright, hands clasped, showing no fear. Claire began by presenting the DNA results. The sample from the wool scarf matches your DNA exactly, with odds of error at 1 in 1 billion. Gary didn't react, just pursed his lips. Reed followed up, we also found industrial nylon rope behind the shop, the exact same type as at the scene. After a few minutes of silence, Gary asked curtly, can I smoke? Claire nodded. As the flame flickered to life, he took a long drag, exhaling thin smoke. You found it better than I thought. Over the 4-hour interrogation, Gary said almost nothing about the case. He denied killing Rebecca, saying maybe someone else touched the scarf, and I was just helping look for her. But every time Reed mentioned the time or location, his eyes wavered. I drove past that forest that night, he said, but I didn't do anything. Claire noticed the change in his voice, no longer certain, like someone excusing himself more than asserting. At the end, when police informed him he would be held pending charges, Gary only asked, is her mother still alive? Upon hearing Linda Moore is still alive, living in Boulder, he bowed his head slightly. Don't tell her anything I confessed to, I owe her an apology. Outside, the news spread wide. The entire town of Estes Park seemed to hold its breath. People who once saw Gary as a model volunteer couldn't believe he could be a killer. The press replayed 1991 footage, the man in a thick coat, trudging through snow, flashlight in hand leading the search party. It all now became a symbol of deception. As the vehicle carrying Gary left headquarters that night, residents stood along both sides of the road, watching silently. No one cheered, no one cursed, just the heavy silence of a community that had just realized that sometimes the devil doesn't come from afar, but lives right next door, for an entire lifetime. The formal interrogation took place on the morning of June 11, 2021, one day after Gary Holbrook's arrest. The interrogation room was bright and cold, fluorescent lights reflecting off the pale face of the 72-year-old man. He sat still, hands on the table, uncuffed. In front of him were Detective Claire Jensen and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, along with the Larimer County prosecutor. The session was fully recorded and videotaped. Claire began with a reminder of his right to remain silent, but Gary said curtly, I don't need a lawyer right now. I'm not running anymore. His voice was hoarse, dry and even like someone who had been awake all night. Claire started with basic questions, how he knew Rebecca Moore, when he last saw her. Gary was silent for a few seconds, then replied, I only knew her from the coffee shop. She often got black coffee to go, sometimes chatted a bit. I liked her, really. Reed interjected, liked her enough to keep her scarf for 30 years. Gary looked up, eyes weary. I didn't kill her, I just wanted to help. The answer sent a chill through Claire. It wasn't the voice of remorse, but of someone still trying to believe his own made-up story. After nearly an hour of evasive back and forth, Claire presented crime scene photos, the green wool scarf, the location where the body was found, the nylon rope, and the DNA results. It all points to you, she said. Gary stared at the photo for a long time, then sighed, his back slumping. She didn't deserve to die, he said softly. That statement prompted Reed to signal the technician to start recording the statement. Gary rubbed his eyes, his voice dropping low. That day, I just meant to take her home. She was crying, said she fought with her boyfriend, didn't want to go back. I said I could drive her for some air. We drove up to Roosevelt Forest. Claire asked, then what happened? She got scared. I think she misunderstood me. I just tried to hold her to talk, but she struggled, screamed, then slipped and fell. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Gary paused, eyes vacant. Reed asked, did you call an ambulance? No, I was scared. I thought no one would believe me. I left her there. It started snowing. I ran back. The next morning I returned. She was already dead. He stopped speaking, swallowing hard. I dug a shallow grave, put her in it. I don't know what I was thinking. I just wanted to hide it. I kept the scarf, because I couldn't throw it away. The interrogation room fell silent. Claire tried to keep her voice steady. You say she fell, but the autopsy shows ligature marks on the neck, and the nylon matches the type you bought. Gary looked down at his hands, voice almost a whisper. Maybe, I lost control. She hit me. I grabbed the rope. I don't remember anymore. The words were enough to turn accident into a confession. Reed ended the session. Do you want to say anything to her family? Gary looked straight into the camera. I'm sorry, but no words are enough. I've lived 30 years with that image in my head. Now it's over. As he was led out of the room, Gary walked slowly, shoulders hunched, as if carrying his entire past. Claire sat back, eyes fixed on the statement sheet. The last line was written in red ink. Suspect admits presence at the scene, confirms negligent act, leading to victim's death, intentional concealment of the body. Outside, summer snow fell lightly on the distant mountain peaks, serene, but for those who witnessed it, the real storm had only just begun. Right after Gary Holbrook partially admitted responsibility for Rebecca Moore's death, the special investigation team didn't stop at the statement. They knew that to build a solid case in court, they needed physical evidence, matching the confession. On June 13, 2021, Larimer County Police coordinated with the Colorado State Forensics Team to return to Roosevelt National Forest, where Rebecca's remains had been found. Under Detective Claire Jensen's supervision, the scene area was expanded nearly 300 meters to the west, where Gary had stated he hid the binding rope and a few other items. Police set up tents, strung yellow tape marking off-grid squares. Forensics experts excavated meticulously, each layer of soil sifted through metal detectors and modern organic detection equipment. The morning was cold and damp, the scent of wet earth and pine resin mixed in the air. Claire stood a few steps from the forensics team, eyes following every movement. 30 years ago, as an intern, she had stood in this forest too, but then in despair. Today she returned with determination to close that tragedy. About 2 hours in, an expert called out, metal object at 40 centimeters depth. The whole team converged immediately. In the exposed layer of soil, they saw a rusted piece of copper wire, fused tightly to an old nylon scrap, coiled like a knot. On-site preliminary testing showed the structure and synthetic fibers matched exactly the cargo binding rope Holbrook had bought in 1991. This was the piece of rope he had confessed to throwing away after burying the victim's body. Not stopping there, the investigation team continued scanning the area along the small stream Gary had mentioned in his statement. A specialized detection device spotted an anomaly about 25 meters from the original burial site. When dug up, they found a deformed silver ring, the inside engraved with RLM, matching the initials of Rebecca Lynn Moore. The Moore family confirmed it was the ring Rebecca always wore on her right ring finger, a gift from her mother in 1988. This evidence not only matched the statement, but also proved the victim had truly been with Holbrook on the night of the incident. When the excavation ended, all evidence was sealed and transported to the Denver Forensics Lab. Experts immediately conducted analysis. The old nylon fibers still held degraded blood traces, enough to extract DNA. Results: the blood belonged to Rebecca. The rope's plastic also bore faint fingerprints, matching Gary's taken at the station. The report was printed and sent to the prosecutor. Irrefutable proof. Parallel to the excavation, the investigation team returned to Holbrook's machine shop for more leads. In the back storage shed, they discovered an old wooden box containing various outdated items: leather gloves, a few 1991 newspapers, and especially a cassette tape labeled for Becky. When played, The content wasn't just music as previously thought, but included a few seconds of static mixed with a man's soft voice. "I'm sorry, Becky." The voice matched Gary's sample from the interrogation exactly. Audio experts confirmed the recording had never been edited, proving it was captured around the time of the crime. All the new evidence was compiled into the case file. When Reed read the complete report, he said only one short sentence, no longer just a statement: "This is the truth." Police officially determined Roosevelt Forest as the crime scene, not just the disposal site. The media immediately reported new discoveries bolster charges in Rebecca Moore case. Suspect once seen as town hero. Estes Park sank back into heavy silence. That night, as she left the scene, Claire paused to gaze at the fog-shrouded forest. She heard the wind whispering through the pine canopy, like a distant voice. In the dim light, the taped-off area blurred, leaving only a feeling of cold and weight. She said softly, like a farewell, "We found everything, Rebecca, and this time we won't let anyone forget." When all the evidence was solidified, the investigative team moved to the final phase, determining the true motive behind the case. That was the question that troubled both Claire Jensen and the Larimer County prosecutor the most. Why would a man seen as a model citizen, kind, and dedicated to helping his neighbors, kill a girl he seemingly had no reason to hate? The psychological analysis was assigned to the FBI's behavioral expert, Dr. Eleanor Sharp, who had worked on many similar cold cases. After 3 weeks of reviewing the files, Eleanor concluded, this wasn't simply a spontaneous crime, but a combination of loneliness, obsession, and a sense of rejection. The files showed that at the time of Rebecca's disappearance, Gary Holbrook had just gone through a period of breakdown. He had lost his wife to cancer in 1989, and lived alone in an old mobile home, with little interaction with anyone except a few regular customers. He saw Rebecca frequently at the coffee shop where she worked the morning shift. According to statements from former co-workers, Gary had a habit of sitting at a table near the door, always ordering the same type of coffee, and often leaving a higher than usual tip. One witness had heard him say, "That girl looks just like my wife when she was young." The seemingly harmless remark later became the key to understanding the perpetrator's psyche. According to Dr. Sharp, Gary didn't intend to kill from the start. He was drawn to Rebecca's kindness and smile, then gradually developed an obsession. When Rebecca rejected his offers of help or avoided contact, he felt insulted and abandoned again, a deep psychological trauma caused by his past loss. On the night of October 11, 1991, when he saw Rebecca leaving the coffee shop in a sad mood, Gary may have seen it as an opportunity to prove himself. He offered to drive her home, and when she refused or showed fear, he lost control. The strangulation wasn't an immediate intent to kill, but a spontaneous reaction from someone trying to cling to emotions, Sharp wrote in her report. The prosecutor determined the primary motive was possessive obsession. Gary didn't want to harm Rebecca out of hatred, but because he couldn't accept rejection. After committing the act, he panicked, tried to hide the body, and returned to the scene multiple times, both to ensure no one discovered it, and as a form of atonement in his distorted mind. His active participation in the search, helping the victim's family, or keeping the wool scarf were all manifestations of suppressed guilt, not goodwill. He wasn't just hiding the crime, he wanted to control everyone's memory of the victim, turning himself into the hero instead of the killer. Claire said in a later interview, that motive made the Rebecca Moore case more haunting than any before it for her. It lacked elements of sex, money, or grudge, only a tragedy of loneliness, rejection, and misguided obsession. When the file was closed, Claire wrote in the final report, Holbrook didn't kill out of hate, he killed because he wanted to be remembered, and in that way, he made the town never forget. On June 25, 2021, after nearly 2 weeks of silence in the Larimer County Jail, Gary Holbrook requested to see Detective Claire Jensen again. He told the guard that he wanted to say the things he hadn't had time to say. The meeting took place in a small interrogation room, without the prosecutor or lawyer present, only with the recorder turned on. When Claire entered, Gary was already seated, his back slightly hunched, his hands clasped tightly, as if trying to hold on to some calm. He didn't look directly at her but just said, "You don't know how much relief this will bring me." Claire didn't respond, only placing Rebecca's photo in front of him. He stared at it for a long time, then began to speak. Gary said that on the night of October 11, 1991, he saw Rebecca leaving the coffee shop alone, her face looking tired. He pulled over to the side of the road and called out, "Do you want me to drive you home?" it's cold out there. The girl hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, because she thought he was just a familiar neighbor. We drove around Estes Lake, talking about work, about winter. She said she was quitting soon, wanted to visit her parents in Boulder. When I heard that, my heart tightened. I thought, if she leaves, I'll never see her again, he said, his voice even, expressionless. According to Gary, when they neared the Roosevelt Trail, he stopped the car, saying he wanted to show her a beautiful scenic spot. Rebecca looked scared and demanded to go back, but he pleaded, I just wanted to extend a few more minutes. She got out of the car, stood by the slope. I remember saying, you make me feel alive. Then she told me to stop, her voice very sharp. He paused for a beat, looking down at the table. She pushed me. I grabbed her hand. Everything happened too fast. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just didn't want her to leave. Claire listened silently. Gary recounted that Rebecca struggled free, screamed loudly. He tried to cover her mouth, and in the panic, he tightened the nylon rope, taken from the trunk. Then everything stopped. She fell down. I knelt beside her, called her name many times, but there was nothing left. His voice choked. Then he sighed. I knew I'd just done something irreparable. I sat next to her for a very long time, until it started snowing. At that moment, I only thought, if anyone sees this scene, they'll think I'm a monster. He said he'd driven home, but the next morning returned with a shovel, burying her body under a thin layer of soil. I didn't have the courage to dig deeper, he said softly. I thought the snow would cover it, and hide everything forever. When Claire asked why he still participated in the search, and interacted with the Moore family, Gary gave a faint smile. Because I wanted to believe I could atone by helping. I wanted everyone to look at me and see a good person. I thought if I did enough right things, maybe God would forgive me. He bowed his head, silent for a long time, then continued, but every night, when I heard they were still searching, I was terrified. I've lived in my own prison for 30 years. Claire looked at him and asked, did you ever think about turning yourself in before being caught? Gary replied slowly, many times, but every time I was about to open my mouth, I thought of Mrs. Linda Moore's eyes. I couldn't bear imagining her knowing the truth from me. I was a coward. I chose silence. The interrogation ended with Gary's final words. You can tell her mother that I never wanted to kill Rebecca. I just couldn't stand her leaving, and that, it turns out, is worse than killing out of hatred. As Claire stood up to leave the room, he remained motionless, his gaze fixed on Rebecca's photo on the table. Outside, the afternoon light filtered through the window frame, casting a pale golden haze over his aged face, the light of a man who had just confessed his sin, but could never be forgiven. On July 2, 2021, a week after Gary Holbrook's confession, the Larimer County Police launched the final excavation at the Roosevelt Forest area, where he claimed he had buried Rebecca deeper than the previously discovered bone site. Gary, under tight supervision, agreed to guide the investigative team. That morning, the sky was blanketed in thick fog, the forest damp with the faint scent of pine resin in the air. Gary was brought to the scene in an orange jail jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his feet shuffling slowly along the slippery trails. When he reached the clearing, near the small stream, he stopped, pointing to a fallen tree trunk, his voice hoarse and trembling. There, I remember, it's there. Claire Jensen stood a few steps away, nodding for the forensics team to begin. The technicians set up tents, cordoned off the area, and marked each point. Metal detectors and human bone detection equipment were used simultaneously. Nearly an hour later, the screen showed a dense signal, at a depth of about 70 centimeters, deeper than the previous bone discovery site. The police fell silent, only the sound of shovels hitting damp soil remaining. When the first layer of earth was peeled back, the old decomposition smell mixed with the cold air rose pungently. A technician called out softly, "Bones," and just minutes later, the nearly intact shape of the skeleton emerged from the ground, the remainder of Rebecca Moore, lying on her side, arms curled in front of her chest, still wrapped in the rotted wool coat. Beside it were an old pair of shoes, a beige knit hat, and a broken nylon rope. No one said anything, only Claire stood still, watching, her hands clenched in her pockets. 30 years, and finally, Rebecca was brought up from the cold earth. Gary looked at the scene, his sunken eyes trembling, as he said, I prayed to God they wouldn't find her, but maybe, it's time. Claire turned to him, saying nothing. She knew no words could make this image less haunting. The police documented on site, all evidence sealed. The skeleton was placed in a specialized bag, transported by coroner's van to Denver for final examination. As the vehicle passed, Claire saw Gary bow his head very low, his lips moving something, perhaps a belated prayer. At the coroner's office, Dr. Melissa Crane and the expert team conducted a meticulous examination. The results confirmed this was the complete body of Rebecca Lynn Moore. Most of the bones were in their original positions, indicating the victim was buried immediately after death with little disturbance. The nylon rope wrapped around the neck was still partially intact, tightened and leaving deep marks on the neck bones, clear evidence of active strangulation, rather than accident. Next to the rib bones was a fragment of the suspect's coat fabric, industrial material commonly used in machine shops, matching samples seized from Holbrook's home. The final report determined the cause of death as asphyxiation due to strangulation, with the time of death matching the night of October 11, 1991. News of the complete body discovery spread that same day. Major newspapers ran headlines, "After 3 decades, the missing girl from Estes Park is finally found." In Boulder, Mrs. Linda Moore received the call from police. She was silent for a long time before saying only "Thank you for bringing my daughter home." The next day, police returned some mementos, a silver ring engraved RLM, small earrings, and a postcard Rebecca had kept in her wallet. Mrs. Linda clutched the bag tightly, tears streaming, but no longer sobbing. "I've waited 30 years to truly cry for my daughter," she said softly. On July 10, 2021, a small memorial ceremony was held at the Estes Park Cemetery. Family, police and townspeople quietly placed flowers by Rebecca's grave. Claire Jensen read a few short lines. "She is no longer forgotten. Justice has called her name." In the far corner, Gary Holbrook was absent. He was still in custody awaiting trial, but in the moment the wind blew through the pine rows, carrying the scent of resin and the sound of wind chimes. It seemed everyone felt Rebecca had returned, not in pain, but in the peace the whole town had waited too long to witness. The final forensic report by Dr. Melissa Crane was released at the end of July 2021, becoming the central document in the prosecution file against Gary Holbrook. The results confirmed that the cause of death for Rebecca Lynn Moore was asphyxiation due to strangulation with a synthetic fiber-structured object, namely the nylon rope found at the scene. The extent of the cervical bone injuries, deep ligature marks on the C3 and C4 vertebrae, and a slight crack in the hyoid bone indicated that the victim was attacked frontally, with the strangulation force sustained for at least 10 seconds. There were no other signs of significant blunt force trauma, which eliminated the possibility of a fall as Gary's initial defense. The report also noted that fibers on the victim's jacket matched exactly the gray-black fabric samples from the work uniform seized at the suspect's machine shop. DNA samples from the jacket cuff, fingernails, and ligature all contained genetic traces of Gary Holbrook. Everything fit together perfectly. Science now spoke for what Rebecca could not tell. Prosecutor Rachel Myers, who was directly in charge of the case, called a special press conference on August 2, 2021, to announce the full forensic results and the decision to prosecute. In a packed press room, Myers declared, with physical evidence, biological evidence, and the testimony of the suspect himself, the Larimer County District Attorney's Office is formally charging Gary Holbrook with 3 counts: first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and concealment of a body. The statement caused the room to erupt in murmurs, while Claire Jensen, sitting in the back, went still. 30 years, and finally she heard the words the whole team had dreamed of. Immediately after the indictment, Gary was transferred to the Colorado State Penitentiary in Greeley to await the preliminary hearing. During the arraignment, he just nodded, neither arguing nor requesting bail. His court-appointed attorney tried to argue that the incident was a spontaneous accident, that Holbrook had lived 30 years as an upstanding citizen, but Prosecutor Myers countered, no accident results in a victim being strangled with industrial rope, buried, and then the perpetrator returning to join the family in the search. This was a deliberate cover-up crime, and Holbrook had lived off that lie for 3 decades. As the court prepared for the trial, the investigative team continued to finalize an in-depth report on the psychology and criminal behavior. The 180-page report, in which Claire Jensen wrote, Holbrook did not act in a moment of impulse, but in a prolonged state of loneliness. He wanted to possess Rebecca as a way to compensate for his own losses, but in his effort to hold on, he destroyed the one thing that still made him feel human. This report was later cited by the prosecution in the closing arguments, showing that the killing involved premeditation, refuting any claims of involuntary manslaughter. Public opinion exploded. National media outlets covered the story in unison, calling it one of the most completely resolved cold cases in Colorado state history. NBC ran a piece titled, "Justice Has No Expiration Date," while the Denver Post wrote, "Estes Park's fake hero formally indicted for 1991 crime." The attention went beyond the personal tragedy, raising questions about how communities sometimes put too much faith in the image of a good guy. On the Moore family side, Linda was notified directly by the police. Despite her frail health, she decided to appear at the press conference to thank the investigative team. With a trembling voice, she said, "I've waited too long to hear someone say my daughter is protected, even if it's late. I don't hate him. I just want him to face the truth." Those words silenced the entire room. That evening, in her small office in Fort Collins, Claire closed the thick case file marked Lair 9107 Moore. She looked out the window, where the lights shone on the distant hazy mountains. 30 years, generations of investigators had touched this case, and now it had reached its final chapter. But for her, this wasn't the end. It was a reminder that justice can be slow, but once it finds a voice, it rings out clearly, making an entire town fall silent to listen. The trial of Gary Holbrook opened on the morning of September 12, 2021, at the Larimer County Courthouse in Fort Collins. The usually quiet building was now packed with reporters, locals, and even some who had participated in the 1991 search. No one could believe that the man once called the model neighbor was now sitting behind bars, facing a first-degree murder charge. Outside the courthouse, TV networks set up cranes and cables, broadcasting every minute of the trial live. Inside, golden light shone down on the wooden benches, where Linda Moore, now in her 80s, sat still, her trembling hands clutching a photo of her daughter. In front of her, Gary Holbrook entered the courtroom, his gait slow but his face eerily calm. He wore an old suit provided by his attorney, his silver hair disheveled, hands clasped on the defendant's table. Gone was the commanding presence of the community helper from years ago, now just a gaunt shadow of a man burdened with layered guilt. Prosecutor Rachel Myers was the first to speak, her voice clear, each word echoing in the heavy space. 30 years ago, a 24-year-old woman vanished into the cold night in Estes Park. For 30 years, the man who took her life lived in the same community, praised and trusted. Today we are here to reclaim justice for her. She pointed at Gary. The DNA evidence, the crime scene, and Mr. Holbrook's own confession speak for themselves. No one is charged because of a mistake, he is charged because of the truth. For the defense attorney, James Orr tried to build the image of a lonely man who made a mistake in a moment of lost control. He said, "My client has endured 30 years of torment. He did not plan a murder, had no motive of hatred or gain. It was a psychological tragedy, not a deliberate act." When Gary was asked to speak, he said softly, "I killed her, but I never wanted it to happen. I wish I could change it." That admission brought tears to many in the room, but Prosecutor Myers remained stone cold. "He didn't just kill Rebecca," she retorted. "He killed an entire town's trust, and made a mother live another 30 years in despair." The trial lasted 10 days. Each piece of evidence was presented: images of the nylon rope, the forensic appraisal, the wool scarf, the map of the Roosevelt Forest area, and even the cassette tape. For Becky, with a man's voice whispering, "I'm sorry." When the tape played, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Linda Moore bowed her head, tears falling soundlessly. In the back row, Claire Jensen sat among the investigators, her eyes fixed on the screen. She had heard that tape dozens of times, but each time it still squeezed her heart. When the prosecutor asked Gary, "Do you remember the moment you tightened that rope?" he looked straight at her, voice hoarse. I remember every second of it, and I wish I could forget." One of the most attention-grabbing parts was the testimony of Detective Claire Jensen. When called to the stand, she recounted the entire investigation process, from reopening the file, collecting trash DNA, to Gary's final confession. "This wasn't just a case," she said, "it was our debt to the victim. Rebecca never had the chance to tell her story, so we did it for her." The courtroom was pin-drop silent. The prosecutor ended the direct examination with one final question. "As someone who followed the case from beginning to end, do you think Mr. Holbrook deserves mercy?" Claire replied curtly, "No, he didn't just take a life, he took trust." When the closing arguments ended, the jury was sent to deliberate. 2 days later, they returned with a unanimous verdict. Gary Holbrook was guilty of first-degree murder. No one in the room could breathe as the sentence was read. Gary stood, hands trembling slightly, his eyes no longer defiant, but weary with acceptance. When the judge pronounced a life sentence without parole, he just nodded, murmuring, "Thank you for ending this." Meanwhile, Linda Moore clutched her daughter's photo, whispering, "You're at peace now, Rebecca." Outside the courthouse, people gathered in the afternoon sun, neither cheering nor raging. They just stood in silence, as if saying goodbye to both the victim and the killer, two people whose fates were bound by an inseparable tragedy. On the steps, Claire Jensen stood looking at the hazy Estes Park sky, her heart heavy. 30 years, justice had its answer, but none of them felt victorious. When a reporter asked her thoughts, Claire simply said, "This isn't a story about crime. It's a story about the patience of those who don't give up, and about how justice, no matter the detour, finally arrives where it's needed." The next day, the media called the verdict the closure of Larimer's longest cold case in history. But for those who had lived with it, it wasn't closure, it was a permanent scar in the memory of a small town, where people had learned that sometimes the devil doesn't lurk in the shadows, but smiles in broad daylight, in oil-stained work clothes and caring eyes. After the trial, Estes Park, the small town at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, fell into silence. People thought the life sentence for Gary Holbrook would wrap everything up, but no. Instead of peace, what remained was a feeling of emptiness, lost faith, and bewilderment. For 30 years, they had believed, praised, and even loved a murderer. The truth exposed forced the entire community to question itself. Had they put too much faith in the shell of goodness? On the main street, the old sign Holbrook Auto Repair was taken down, leaving only faint paint marks. Passers-by all paused for a moment, saying nothing. A middle-aged man muttered, "I used to let him fix the family car. I believed in his smile." That spiritual wound burrowed deep into the town's heart. The old church, where a prayer vigil for Rebecca had been held in 1992, opened its doors again. During the service, Father Martin said, "We didn't just lose a girl, we lost faith in our own kindness." Many who had joined the search back then were now elderly, but the regret hadn't faded. A woman broke down in tears recounting, "Gary held my hand and said, 'We'll find her.' I believed he meant it. Looking back now, I feel so foolish." The media gradually left, leaving behind a quiet Estes Park with the somber air of someone who had just passed through a nightmare. The Trailhead Diner coffee shop, where Rebecca once worked, now had new owners. On the brick wall, they hung an old photo of her with the small inscription, "For Becky, you're home now." Coffee drinkers no longer mentioned the case, just gazed silently at the photo. For the younger generation, Rebecca became a symbol of truth that never sleeps. A group of high school students in town started the Rebecca Moore Memorial Fund to support unsolved missing persons cases in Colorado. When invited to speak at the fund's launch, Detective Claire Jensen said, "Rebecca reminds us that justice may take the long way, but it never stops." Linda Moore, Rebecca's mother, chose to quietly live out her remaining days. She refused all interviews, only writing thank you letters to those who hadn't given up. In one letter to Claire, she wrote, "Thank you for bringing my daughter home. I believe Rebecca has forgiven, and I've learned to sleep peacefully too." Every weekend, people still saw her sitting by her daughter's grave, reading poetry softly, as if chatting with her. That sight became a familiar and deeply moving image in the eyes of Estes Park residents. As for Gary Holbrook, now an elderly loner in the Fremont State Prison, he didn't appeal, didn't meet the press, only wrote a single letter to prosecutor Rachel Myers. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope she's remembered as the person she was, not as my victim." That letter was never released, kept only in the files. When Claire read it again, she said, "That's not repentance. That's a man who finally realized that silence couldn't save him from his own memories." In October 2021, exactly 30 years since Rebecca went missing, the town held a memorial ceremony by the Roosevelt Forest. On the ground where her body was once found, they erected a simple stone marker engraved with the words Rebecca Lynn Moore, 1967, 1991. Justice doesn't forget, memories don't fade. Residents, police and students lined up to release white flowers into the nearby stream. Claire Jensen was there too, standing silently in the woods, eyes toward the mountains. No one mentioned Gary anymore. He had been buried by time, and his sentence, only Rebecca was honored with respect. Since then, Every October, a small candlelight vigil is still held in Estes Park. People don't talk about the crime, but about faith, that goodness must come with vigilance, that justice is sometimes slow, but never vanishes. On the mountain slopes, the first snow of the season falls again, blanketing the town in a thin white layer, as if to cover the dark years. Estes Park can finally sleep peacefully, but the memory of Rebecca Lynn Moore, the girl who made an entire town relearn how to trust, will never fade. The story of the Rebecca Moore case is not just a tragic crime, but also a profound reflection of a pressing aspect in contemporary American life: the fragility of trust and the need for vigilance in the community. In a country that prides itself on its sense of unity and the spirit of neighbor helping neighbor, the people of Estes Park trusted Gary Holbrook, a devoted neighbor always ready to lend a hand, to such an extent that no one questioned his presence at every search effort. It was that absolute trust, once the moral foundation of American communities, that became the cover for a crime buried for 30 years. The story reminds us that kindness is essential, but it must be accompanied by the ability to ask questions, by caution in the face of a perfect facade. In a modern society where social media and the press can easily create polished versions of people, that lesson is all the more valuable. Not everyone who appears kind is truly trustworthy. At the same time, the 30-year journey to seek justice for Rebecca reflects the resilient spirit of the U.S. legal system, where justice may come late, but it is never forgotten. The efforts of Detective Claire Jensen and the Special Investigation Team are an image of faith in the truth, a core value in American culture. Even in the face of disappointment, the truth holds more value than false peace. That story, if examined in today's life, is a reminder for every American to both maintain compassion and hone the ability to spot what's wrong, because sometimes, vigilance is the highest form of kindness a community can offer one another. Thank you for following the story to the end, where justice, though late, still finds its way back. If you believe that the truth always deserves to be heard, please subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more cold cases that have shaken America.